Goeiemiddag studente, welkom by week 10 van AROS. Ons is nog steeds in 'n grendelstaat. Ek hoop julle is hard aan die werk en te oordeel aan die eposse wat ek kry, is daar ook hard gewerk aan die semesteropdrag. Kom ons loer gou na die skedule. Julle sal teen die einde van die naweek die semesteropdrag ingee. Dit beteken julle het hierna nog net 2 aktiwiteite of assesserings oor vir die res van die semester, E-klas toets 2 in week 12 en die Continuous Assessment Activity 2 vir week 11. Julle sal sien die vrae vir die Continuous Assessment Activity is dieselfde. Die enigste verskil is dit is 'n ander teks. Dit is 'n breë spektrum vrae daai wat op enige teks behoort of moontlik te kan werk. Goed. Julle is bekend met die kontakbesonderhede. Ek en mevrou Bischoff is meeste van die tyd beskikbaar. Onthou net, vakansiedae vat ons ook maar 'n breekie en ons sal vir jou deur e-pos laat weet indien ons met verlof is. Okay, what are we going to do today? We specifically looking at Dead Poets Society. We are going to look at the characters and the themes behind this film. Someone asked me this week, or a couple of people asked me this week, I suppose they're using the time, when they study, what do they need to study? Nou boonbehalwe dat jy jou gewone literary devices moet gebruik, soos wat is allegory, of ken, wat is allegory, wat is goeders soos motive, theme, al aan daai goeders, dink ek die belangrikste ding is om jou te gaan vereenselwig met die teks. How would you do that? Remember, a lot of these things that you know about a certain text, you don't necessarily learn at university or stuff like that. You have to go and actively read up about it. En dit was een van die doele agter die semesteropdrag ook, dat jy ekstra leeswerk oor die teks, kommentare gaan lees en dan jou eie kommentaar rondom dit vorm binne 'n geskrewe stuk. En dit is dieselfde met Dead Poets Society. Ek het nie op universiteit geleer van Dead Poets Society, maar ek het 'n bepaalde tegniek en goed geleer wat ek nou weer aan julle wys. So ek het die film gaan kyk en ek het die kommentare gaan lees en ek het besluit, goed, hierdie is die algemene kommentaar en hierdie van hierdie kommentaar is way out, ek kan nie daarin glo nie, en van hierdie kommentaar maak vir my sin en dit pas daarbey. So as jy vir beide Lord of the Flies en Dead Poets Society wil gaan voorberei, sal ek aan jou die voorstel wil maak, gaan Google goeders, gebruik die keyword Dead Poets Society themes, Lord of the Flies, amper sê ek Lord of the Flies Society, Lord of the Flies Motifs, en gaan kyk wat daar op die internet beskikbaar is. Jy behoort na 'n ruk agter te kom, maar luister, hierdie is die algemene goed, dis die algemene goed waar mense saamstem, en jy behoort baie vinnig agter te kom, maar wag so 'n bietjie, hierdie goed wat hier sê is bietjie way out, dit pas nie daarbey nie. Dis ook hoe ons besluit of ons vir jou of watter websites ons nie as bronne ag nie. Dit is die belangrike ding daar agter. Ekskuus, ek wil net 'n slukkie tee vat. Okay, the first thing I'd like us to discuss are the characters of Dead Poets Society. I'm going to quickly go through them. I've provided a photo of each of them for you as well, so that you know who they are. The information as such is just like this in your study guide, so I'm not going to spend too much time over this. One of the definite protagonists in Dead Poets Society is Mr. Keating. He's the English teacher, played by Robin Williams. He's eccentric. He's also a Welton old boy. In other words, he attended the school, and because of his eccentricity, he has lost many jobs. One of his understudies, to a certain extent, is the character of Neil Perry, played by Robert Sean Leonard, who you'll recognize from House, the television series. He's very talented. He's a fearful young boy. He wants to become an actor, but his father is very stone-hearted towards him, a very cold relationship with his son, and his father wants him to study medicine at Harvard. The big difference, and this is important because this could be a good exam question, the big difference between him and the other boys at Welton is his family is not well-to-do. They are not rich. And he had to work very hard for his place at at Welton, and his parents have had to make many sacrifices to let him go to school there. So that is a very important thing to remember, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why his father is so stone-hearted towards him. Then we've got Todd Anderson. He is the new student at Welton. He's there to fill the shoes of his older brother. If you think back to the opening assembly scene, he sits there with his parents and he's not really impressed by what he sees, but he's also a very shy, unlike most of the adult roles that Ethan Hawke played. He's very shy, he's very drawn back. He shares a room with Neil Perry, and Neil Perry takes him under his wing at the start of the film. At the end of the film, you'll see there's a lot of character development with regards to Todd. Richard Cameron is regarded as a traditionalist student in the sense that he idealizes the whole idea behind Welton and the traditionalist views that Mr. Nolan, the headmaster, holds true to. He can be regarded as a goody two-shoes. He is typically the one who would go and tell on the group, etc. Yet he's accepted in the group, but he's not really always part of the inner circle of the group. Next, we have Charlie Dalton, the son of a rich banker. He's a happy-go-lucky rebel, and he doesn't care about his position at Welton. It's actually typical in such schools that you always get that kind of character who enjoys the opportunities offered at the school, but doesn't care for the school that much. Knox Overstreet, played by Josh Charles. He's a member of the Dead Poets Society. He's supportive of Mr. Keating, but he's also got other things on his mind, namely to woo his love interest, Chris, which we'll discuss as a character in a second. Then if we move on, a lesser character, Mr. Nolan, the headmaster. He's traditionalist, as we can see in the opening scene. He believes in the 4 pillars of the school, and he'd like to entrench this in his students' mind. Stephen Meeks is a bit of a nerd of the group. He, although he is part of the group, that's very important. He supports almost blindly all the actions of his friends, but he doesn't really have the courage to speak out alone. Then you've got Chris Noel, the love interest of Knox. She's a cheerleader at another school called Ridgeway High. Towards the end or somewhere in the storyline, she dumps her current boyfriend, Chet, at Danbury. And of course, Knox Overstreet, when he visits the Danburys for the first time for dinner, he falls head over heels in love with Chris. In fact, he comes back and he says, I've just seen the most beautiful, can't remember if he said girl or woman, when he returns back to the school after dinner at the Danburys. And then finally, Chet Danbury himself. He, if you refer to it in good street English, he's a bit of a jock. He's one of, as I said, having had dinner at the Danburys, he's one of Knox Overstreet's father's friends. He's characterized as hypermasculine. He attacks Knox. He's very jealous when Knox tries to touch Chris. And he has also formerly attended Welton, but is now at Ridgeway High. To a certain extent, that goes to show that even the popular people or the mainstream people do not necessarily fall on within the 4 pillars of Welton. Okay, let's move on to the themes. I'm going to mention a couple of themes, but I'm only going to discuss 2 of them. The typical themes, as you would have noticed from your study guide, is a tradition, which is very much easily explainable, discipline, as almost an offshoot of tradition, freedom of choice, which there isn't necessarily much of at Welton, coming of age, typically the whole message or part of the message behind Mr. Keating's Carpe Diem or Seize the Day message, Carpe Diem or Seize the Day itself, rebellion and individuality. And I'm going to discuss Carpe Diem and rebellion. Okay. The whole idea behind Carpe Diem and Seize the Day, we see right at the start when Mr. Keating's character is introduced. when he bursts into the classroom, seizing the opportunity to enrich young minds. He's not traditionalist at all, very unorthodox, and he wants to make the lives of his students extraordinary. The whole idea behind Carpe Diem is thinking differently, alternative ideas, breaking away from basically the boxed environment that the boys are used to. Then we've got a contrast to this. As I said earlier, Welton has a one-size-fits-all philosophy. And then Keating's philosophy contradicts this when he says, we're all going to die. The question that he basically asks is, if we are all going to die, how are you going to live? And not you as a group, you as an individual. So remember that. He says we are all going to die, but think of what happens in reverse before we all die. How do you live as an individual? Secondly, just as another way of saying that, we're all going to be food for worms. Keating, well, the commentaries I've read is Keating sees the sameness that we see at Welton, as the basic condition of death. He says the only sameness that there must be is the fact that we're all going to die one day. Then, if we move on, Keating is as character within this theme. He wants to teach the students to think for themselves. And to a certain extent, that is one of the big reasons why I chose Dead Poet Society as a film to discuss with you guys this semester, because you as teachers must have, or let me put it to you like this: if you want to be an extraordinary teacher, you must teach your children or the learners in front of you to think for themselves, to think outside the box, not just to follow all the rules, because that's the good thing to do. Of course, there needs to be rules. There needs to be a certain frame within which everybody sits. But a sign of thinking outside the box, a sign of emotional maturity, is to understand when and how far one can move outside of these rules to make one's life interesting. There's a bit of an irony in Seizing Day. Neil Perry's case is rather tragic because he reasons that a life without creativity and originality is worthless and not worth living, and subsequently commits suicide. To a certain extent, we can say he sticks to Welton's one-sided philosophy, but if we take the metaphor further, he uses Keating's recipe. Okay, so Neil Keating is a very important character in the sense that he's got so much promise for what Mr. Keating is trying to teach the boys, but so little understanding of what he is trying to show that. And in the end, he's a bit of a tragic hero and takes his own life. What we can say further about Neil Perry, trusting Mr. Keating's ideas. Mr. Keating meant that we're all going to die, let's live life to the fullest. And he'll interpret this as, because we can't live life to the fullest, we should die. Which, as I said, is very tragic. Neil doesn't realize that there's more than one way to live life to the fullest. Other examples within this theme includes when Mr. Perry forces Neil to change his extracurricular activities. To Mr. Perry, academic success is important in Neil's life, even if Neil has to give up some of his passions. That's against the idea of seizing the day. Another example is after the first class, I don't know if you recall, Mr. McAllister walks into Keating's class and he thinks Keating's not there because there's so much noise. But then he sees that Keating's there and then he apologizes and moves away. He basically says to Keating that he is misguiding the students by what he does. He's trying to teach his students to be artists. To quote him, he said that once they realize they're not Rembrandts or Shakespeare's or Mozart, they'll hate you for it. Keating insists, however, that he's trying to produce free thinkers and not artists. The irony behind these famous names like Rembrandt, Shakespeare, and Mozart is exactly the point that what made them brilliant is the fact that they thought outside the box. So that is actually quite ironic that Mr. McAllister should use these as examples. I just want to take another sip of tea before we move on to the theme of rebellion. You'll see many of these themes in terms of substance and in ideas are very much connected. I've used a rebellion as an overarching theme because you can use many of the other things, or many of the things that it mentions you can use with the other themes as well. To a certain extent, and I wouldn't say that entirely, Mr. Keating inspires his students to rebel, but to rebel against something specifically, and that is the repressive, sometimes tyrannical culture at Walton Academy. Okay, I want you to understand clearly, he doesn't try to say that institutions like Walton shouldn't exist. He just says that institutions like Walton should think again about how they develop these young men for the grown-up world. There's many ways in which the students take or rebel. Internally, as I've said there, they free their minds from the conformity. If you think about Neil not conforming with his dad and acting in the play, if you think about the Dead Poet Society as a whole, is a rebellion against the structures that Walton offer. And you'll often see there that, or you'll see in the scenes there, the boys smoke, and I'm not sure if they drink, but they do a lot of things that they wouldn't be able to do within the confines of Walton. Of course, the pranks as well. The next thing that I'd like to bring under your attention under the theme of rebellion is taking it back to Neil Perry's suicide. That was a extreme form of rebellion. He literally killed himself to rebel against his father. The problem behind that is a rebellion is only successful if it achieves its aims. And I don't think by what he did, he achieved his aims. He simply made the world a darker place through his suicide. The film is an important distinction between rebellion. That's what I've been trying to say. There is in society a place for like Walton, but it is how one internally thinks about these institutions. Okay, and it says there, the rebellion for the sake of rebellion in the first place, and rebellion grounded in sincerity and passion. Now, the important thing that Mr. Keating as protagonist shows there is rebellion must be grounded in sincerity and passion. So you mustn't be a rebel just for the sake of being difficult and being a rebel. You must have a cause. There must be something behind it for you to rebel. If you specifically look at the earliest lessons at Walton, Keating shows the boys that the way to conform against to rebel against conformity as Walton is to live passionately. And most of these characters live passionately. Some might not be as expressive as others, but all of them have some kind of passion. Niels is acting. Knox is Chris, ironically. What is the Todd is he writes, okay, and he does certain things. So at the end of the day, Keating's character is trying to tell his audience, the boys, that a good life is a passionate life, lived according to the individual's unique talents and interests. We aren't zombies, we aren't all the same. So make the life you can out of this. Okay. That sounds a bit, if we think within the context of Aros, it sounds a bit hedonistic. Hedonisme beteken jy's net uit daar op om plesier uit die lewe te put. En dit is in 'n sekere sin so. Ek dink die maklikste Aros woord is om passie of passion to replace it with would be a calling, roeping. En dit is natuurlik wat ons vir julle as onderwysers ook leer waar julle in die skole uitgaan, dat julle roeping gedrewe Christen onderwysers is. Dat jy jou roeping as onderwyser binne jou lewe as Christen kan sien en kan plaas. En dit sluit baie goed aan by hierdie boodskap van passie, or passion itself. Okay, the important thing to remember about that, die belangrike ding om roeping te onthou is, die verkeerde ding wat baie keer agter roeping gevoeg word is jy moet bereid wees om te ly vir die roeping. En baie van ons stem nie reg daaroor saam nie. Iemand het eendag die grapjie gemaak om te sê, dit help nie, jy leef jou roeping uit nie, want jy kan nie die produkte wat jy moet koop om jouself in die lewe te hou van die rak af roep nie. Maar, want dit is nie waaroor dit gaan nie. En vir my is dit daai basiese ding van hoe die Heilige Gees ons lei ook binne ons roeping. En die belangrike ding is dat die Heilige Gees jou hoop gee, maar hy gee jou ook verstand. So ek dink nie die bedoeling daar agtering is dat roeping vir jou 'n lewe van slawerny beteken byvoorbeeld en nie waar jy jouself nie aan die lewe kan hou net omdat jy jou roeping uitleef. Okay, let's carry on with rebellion. Keating's lesson suggests that true rebellion must be personal before it becomes external. En in 'n sekere sin is dit presies ook hoe roeping werk, waarvan ons nou gepraat het. He gives the example there, an adult who gives up on an unsatisfying job to pursue his passion is rebelling against society. Want die samelewing sê vir jy moet so en so en so wees. In 'n sekere sin is die samelewing reg ook, maar dit beteken nie jy is net nog 'n weergawe van 'n mens nie. Elke mens is uniek ook. Dit is belangrik daarin. The important point is trying to make when you rebel against society, you don't have to use violence or interfering with other people's lives. So mense moet baie keer mooi dink oor rebels wees en oor roeping self ook. Wat se impak gaan dit op ander mense wees? If we put it in another way, rebellion against the status quo has to be the result of passion, not the other way around. So you can't rebel because of passion. Because of the status quo, you must rebel because of the passion you have. That is very important. Okay, another drink of tea for me, and then we'll move on to motives or motifs. That will also be the last section for today's lesson. Okay, I'm going to discuss two motifs there. Firstly, Mr. Keating is always never alone. Think about how many times in the film you see Mr. Keating alone. The next one there is Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. That is a classical piece of music, which I'll give you a bit more of background. Then there's also choices. I say that it may be a theme as well. It depends on how it's presented. Choices often is a good motive to back up many of your other themes. Then there's light and darkness, a bit of a theme that is not always that easy to grasp. And then the seeking of individuality. Studente, onthou wat ek vir julle gesê het. Gaan lees die kommentaar oor die film op die internet ook, want dit is deel van hoe jy kan voorberei vir die toets of vir die eksamen wat jy gaan kry. Ek kan nie net vir jou sê dit en dit is wat jy moet leer nie. Veral op hierdie interpretasie tipe vrae is baie van die goed wat jy gelees het help jou ook voorberei aan die vraag suksesvol te antwoord. Okay, the first motive that we see here that supports pathetic themes. Particular themes is the tearing out of the textbook introductions. That would support the theme of rebellion very well. Mr. Keating, he asks the students to tear out of their introductions. It's symbolic of the distaste for the past ways that Walton has taught poetry. If you recall correctly, the person that wrote the introduction is some overqualified professor. Now, I've got aspirations to be a professor as well one day, but I think what it's basically trying to say is hou matigheid voor oë, as ek die Afrikaanse stelling kan gebruik. It's also a motive that signifies Keating's desire to be bold, rebellious and unpredictable, and he encourages his students to be this as well. Which of course lines up very nicely with a couple of the themes that we've mentioned. The next motive there is Mr. Keating is almost never alone. Okay, that is very important because it signifies a lot. It goes back to what he says about seizing the day, functioning within society, but not as just another form of society, standing out as individual. There are only two places in the film where Mr. Keating is shown on his own. When he cries in his classroom over Neil's death, and then when he waves to Mr. McAllister from his office window after he's been fired. Importantly, all other times Mr. Keating is surrounded by the people or the children or the students that learn from him, that literally hang on his knowledge to drink in his philosophy, or hang on his lips, not his knowledge. The next thing we can say there about that is this reflects his influential nature. And it isn't so much that the film is personally about him, but about the ideas and the effects he has on others. Okay, The next motive then, I'm hoping this would play, this is also the final motive, is that of Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. Let's give you a bit of a background against that. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky was a Russian composer. He also composed Swan Lake and Peter and the Wolf and all kinds of things. He's a composer that had very much or held had a unique ability to transpose certain figures and actions and characters into musical instruments and musical sounds. So if you think, for example, of Peter and the Wolf, there was a specific sound for Peter and a specific sound for the wolf, and the whole story behind it. Now, his 1812 Overture is a very unique piece of classical music in the sense that it is 15 minutes long, which is quite long for an overture, and it basically deals with the battle between the Russian imperial troops and the French dictator called Napoleon, who at that stage had conquered more of Europe than Adolf Hitler could do in the Second World War. Now, what's important to remember about Napoleon, he simply had the desire to unify Europe behind ideas. He wasn't like Hitler that wanted to create a super race. Okay, and the French were, for much of the 18th century within Europe, were rather militarily invincible. Okay, and Napoleon, a little short man from the island of Corsica, was the image behind this invincibility. And then when they met the Russians, similar to the Germans in the Second World War, they thought they were going to walk over the Russians, vast swaths of territory that they could take hold of. But the Russian winter and the Russian troops fought valiantly against them and rebuffed their attack and kicked them out of Russia. Mr. Keating whistles the introduction from Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture frequently. The other interesting thing about the 1812 Overture, now that I think about it, it's the only overture or the only musical instrument that makes use of weapons, because Tchaikovsky specifically included, sometimes they don't use real ones, but specifically included cannons as part of the overture to signify the French. The French had very good cannons, and in the live performances, often there are cannons as part of the performance. I'm hoping you can hear this. I'm going to play the intro to you and hopefully the end that include the cannons. If I can just get my mouse. There we go. Should start. I'm not sure if you can read this. Otherwise, you can go and listen to it on the slide itself. You'll also hear from the overture there's a very distinct build-up to the actual beginning. And then here towards the end, from about, I wonder if I can do it, from about 10, 11 minutes on, you'll start hearing the cannons coming in as well. Very distinctive of the French. Okay, students, let me just stop that. Let's move on. It seems like we're done for today. I'd like to wish you a very happy weekend. Keep on working, keep on communicating, get those things in. I've posted the Turnitin link for continuous activity 2 as well, and by the end of next week I'll hopefully have posted the E-klas toets 2. Alles van die beste julle, goed gaan.